Welcome back to Immersed in Him. These are true miracle stories that have happened in real life. My name is Brian. Recap, started this channel because I had a miracle of my own, and now I'm just trying to get stories of miracles out there. This first story is actually very close to, it hits really close to home, and I actually really love this story. A lot of people may have heard this one, but it's a miracle of healing, and she also gets a visit from a heavenly messenger, which is also why I feel like it hits close to home. So here we go. Story number 1. Christmas Eve, 2011, a woman lay helpless on the floor of her own home. Twisted in pain, unable to move. For nearly 20 years, the doctors had all told her the same thing. She would never walk again. Her spine had curled, her foot had twisted inward. One hand had clenched shut for almost 2 decades, and after years of suffering, doctors were preparing to amputate both of her legs. But before sunrise on Christmas morning, something happened inside of that house, and her family still struggles to explain what that was. Because the woman who had spent 16 years trapped in a wheelchair would walk again before the night was over, and according to her, Jesus himself was the one holding her hand. For most people, Christmas Eve is filled with warmth. Lights glowing through the windows, families gathered together, music softly playing in the background. But for Emma McKinley, Christmas Eve had become just another painful reminder of everything she had lost. Nearly 20 years earlier, in 1993, Emma's life had changed forever after a horrific workplace accident. While working in a storage loft, she fell and became trapped upside down for hours before someone finally found her. The injuries were devastating. Soon after, she developed a rare neurological disorder known as reflex sympathetic dystrophy, a condition so painful it's often called one of the most agonizing disorders in medicine. Over time, her body had begun to deteriorate. Her neck had twisted, her spine had curved, her left hand clenched shut into a permanent fist. One foot bent inward unnaturally. The pain was never over, it never stopped. Eventually, she couldn't walk anymore. For 16 years, Emma lived almost entirely in a wheelchair, and yet somehow, the people closest to her say her faith never broke. Even when blood clots threatened her life, even when doctors discussed amputating her legs, even when daily survival became exhausting, she kept praying, not because life was easy, but because hope was all she had left. And then came Christmas Eve, 2011. Late that night, Emma fell from her wheelchair onto the floor of her home. She couldn't get up. For 8 excruciating hours, she lay there alone in unbearable pain. Imagine the silence of that room, the exhaustion, the fear, the helplessness. Hour after hour, unable to move. Most people would have broken emotionally in that moment. But Emma says she did the only thing she knew how to do. She prayed again and again, crying out to Jesus for help. And according to her testimony, that's when the atmosphere in the room suddenly changed. She described hearing what sounded like a rushing wind filling the house. Then she saw something, a figure standing nearby, a white robe so bright, she said that human eyes could barely even look at it. And then she said she felt her body begin to change. Her twisted foot started straightening, her spine shifted, her neck aligned. The hand that had been clenched shut for nearly 20 years slowly opened. Bone after bone, joint after joint, she said she could actually hear cracking sounds throughout her body. Then came the moment she says changed her life forever. She claimed Jesus reached out his hand toward her, and for the first time in years, she stood up. Can you imagine that moment after nearly 2 decades in a wheelchair? Standing on your own 2 feet. Not in a hospital, not during surgery, not after moments of therapy, but alone on the floor of your own home in the middle of Christmas Eve. And then she walked. The next morning, her family arrived for Christmas. Celebrations completely unaware of what had taken place hours earlier. Her son Jason remembers seeing movement down the hallway. And then suddenly there was his mother walking towards them. He later said it felt so surreal because in his mind, his mother belonged in the wheelchair. That's the only version of her he had known for years, decades. But now she was walking. Her family burst into tears, hugging and staring, trying to process what they were seeing. For the first time in years, Emma says she was able to embrace her grandchildren while standing up. And maybe that's what makes the story so emotional, is it's not just the miracle itself, but the small moments that it restored for Emma. A hug, a walk down the hallway, a mother standing beside her family again. Now, obviously, stories like this create debate. Some people call it divine healing, others search for medical explanation, while others, skeptics, question whether spontaneous recoveries can actually really happen. But regardless of what someone believes, one thing is undeniable: something happened that night on Christmas Eve that completely changed her life. Even news stations covered the story, and to this day, Emma continues sharing her testimony around the world. Because for her, the miracle wasn't just about walking again, it was about hope. Hope for people who feel abandoned. Hope for people who are trapped in pain, for people who feel like they will never recover or change. And maybe that's why the story continues to resonate with millions of people, is because whether you believe in miracles or not, there's something powerful about a person refusing to give up after 20 years of suffering, especially on a night meant to remind people that light can still appear in darkness. And somehow, in a quiet home on Christmas Eve, a woman who was never supposed to walk in stood up and walked into Christmas morning. Obviously, if you know my story, you probably understand why I like this story so much, is because the miraculous healing, of course, the seeing of Jesus. Obviously, even just reading that gets me a little emotional, because it takes me back to the time that I did, and the things that I was missing. I don't remember if I talked about in my videos how I used to get to play with my kids so much. We used to love to, play fight and stuff. And the very next morning after I was healed, I was able to do that. And that was the first thing we did, is just play fight on the bed. We called it tickle tackle. And that was like one of my favorite things to do. And the very first morning I was healed, I was able to do that. So I understand what she's saying when she was talking about being able to bend down and pick up her kids while she was standing. These miracles just bring more than just the healing, more than just even the hope and the faith. It brings the human aspect of the suffering, because we all suffer in our own ways. And I think for her, mine wasn't nearly 20 years, but for her, the perseverance of 20 years believing that she can be healed and then being healed so miraculously was just an amazing story. So that's why I like this story. But we are going to move on to story number 2. One moment, a young man is laughing in the passenger seat of his car, and the next, glass explodes across his face. Metal twists, the windshield shatters, and his body is thrown straight through it. Doctors would later spend 2 years trying to save his eyesight, 35 operations in total. Some of the best eye specialists in the world. And in the end, all they could say is there was absolutely no hope. There was nothing they could do. That's what they told his family anyways. He would be blind forever. But then, something happened that nobody could explain. This story happened in Scotland. After the crash, he was airlifted to Ninewells Hospital, one of the top hospitals in the country for eye trauma and reconstructive surgery. The accident had destroyed his eyes and, of course, his eyesight. When he went through the windshield, he managed to get his arms up just enough to protect part of his face, but not enough to fully protect his eyes, unfortunately. The damage was catastrophic and permanent. For the next 2 years, their lives revolved around hospital rooms, surgeries, bandages, pain, waiting and hoping. 35 operations in total. Every procedure was another attempt to save what little vision he might still have left. And every time they prayed the next surgery would be the one that actually worked. But eventually, the doctors ran out of options. After 2 years, the specialists sat the family down, and what they said next changed everything. The lead doctor spoke carefully. He explained that they had done absolutely everything possible. Every surgery, every treatment, every procedure available, but nothing had worked. The damage to his eyes was simply too severe. The doctor told him that he would be 100% blind for the rest of his life. But then he said something the family would never forget. He said the job now is to help him learn how to live as a blind man. Not how to recover, not how to heal, not how to even survive. And that devastated the family. But they were simply out of options at that point. So after 2 years in the hospital, they released him into his family's care. And then suddenly, the reality of it all hit them. He would never see again. That night, something happened that his sister hadn't done in years. She got down on her knees and she started to pray. She hadn't prayed in a really long time. She had stopped going to Mass years earlier. Faith had become distant to her. But that night, none of that mattered anymore. She prayed harder than she had ever prayed in her entire life. She begged God to restore her brother's eyesight, and then she made a promise. She told God that if someone had to lose their vision, just to take hers instead. Let her brother see again. 3 days later, is that a coincidence? I'm not sure. But 3 days later, on a bright sunny afternoon, everything changed. She took her brother out for a walk. He held onto her arm while she guided him down the street, and as they walked, someone he knew saw them from the distance. The man waved and shouted hello. He turned toward her and asked, who is that? She told him who the man's name was and said, he just waved at us. Then he said something that stopped her cold. He said, I know. I could make out the shadow of his arm moving in the air. For a second, she couldn't even speak because according to every doctor, that shouldn't have been possible. When they got home, she immediately told her mother what had happened. And so her mom called the doctor right away. He was taken back into the hospital for more tests. The specialists examined him very carefully, and when the results came back, the doctors sat their mother down again. He explained that medically, nothing had changed. According to every scan, every exam, every diagnosis, he was still 100% blind. The doctors insisted that it was impossible for him to see. He explained that sometimes the brain can create illusions, that the mind can fill in gaps after trauma, and that was most likely what was happening. He went into great detail about the damage that had been done to his eyes, and he stated that recovery could not happen naturally or medically. There was no explanation, no scientific reason, no surgical success that could account for what was happening, and yet he kept seeing more and more and more. Slowly his vision began returning. Shapes became clearer, the movement, the faces, then details. Over time, the man who had been declared permanently blind recovered nearly all of his eyesight. And today, he has approximately 98% of his vision restored. He wears contact lenses, and unbelievably, his eyesight is now better than his sister's. Doctors said it was impossible. Medicine said there was no hope. The specialists had done everything they could, and still, something happened that they could not explain. Maybe some people would call it coincidence. Maybe others would call it the brain somehow healed in a way that nobody expected. But for the family, well, they believe something else happened that day, because sometimes when all hope is gone, when science has no answers left, when the impossible stands directly in front of us, miracles happen. And sometimes they happen when you least expect them. Okay, on to story number 3. A mother goes into labor 3 months too early in the middle of a business trip. Doctors rush into the room. Nurses panic. A baby is about to be born at only 28 weeks. And this mother already knows what it feels like to lose a child. By every logical reason, she should have been terrified. But instead, a strange peace filled the room. And a single sentence repeated in her mind over and over and over again. As long as he's breathing, he'll be okay. That's what she would hear. What happened next would become something her family would never forget. The year was 2011. She was pregnant with her second child and about 28 weeks along. Nearly 3 months early. She had gone on a business trip with her mother and her brother for the family business. At first, everything seemed normal. They were driving through Nashville, and suddenly, on the second day of the trip, she went into labor. At first, nobody fully understood how serious this was, but by the time they reached the hospital, things were moving fast. Too fast. The doctors tried to stop the labor, but it was already too late. And then suddenly, someone yelled, "We can see the baby's head." The room exploded into chaos. Doctors rushed around frantically trying to prepare before the baby arrived. Machines beeping, nurses shouting instructions, medical equipment being thrown into place. And then her water broke violently across the bed, the nurses, and her legs. There was no more time. The baby was coming. But what made this moment even more terrifying was something almost nobody else in the room knew. Years earlier, she had already lost a child at 27 weeks, just 1 week earlier than what she was going into labor now. A devastating loss that happened at home, in her bathtub, while her husband desperately called the hospital for help. So now, here she was again, at 28 weeks, another pregnancy, another premature labor, almost the exact same point in development. Most mothers would have been overwhelmed with fear, and medically, they had every reason to be. Babies born this early often face lifelong complications, breathing problems, brain bleeds, developmental disorders, permanent disabilities. Everything about this moment should have felt hopeless to her, but somehow it didn't. Instead of fear, she felt peace. A peace so overwhelming, so unnatural that even years later, she still can't explain it or comprehend it. And through all the chaos around her, one sentence repeated in her mind over and over again: as long as he's breathing, he'll be okay. Not maybe, not hopefully. He will be okay. She had no medical reason to believe this. No reassurances from doctors, no guarantee whatsoever. But the words stayed with her the entire time. And somehow, she remained calm. Then her son was born. Tiny, fragile, weighing in at only 2 pounds and 12 ounces. Yet the second he entered the world, he made his presence known. He screamed, he cried, he kicked wildly. And according to everyone in the room, he made it very clear he was not happy about the early arrival. In fact, he even peed on the nurses twice while they tried cleaning him up. And instead of terror, his mother could only stare at him in awe. She kept thinking how beautiful he was, as if he'd been born completely full term. And then the words came true. He was breathing and he was okay. But what happened next made the entire experience feel even more impossible, because that very night, a specialist just happened to be there. A highly specialized NICU doctor, someone trained specifically to care for extremely premature babies, was just visiting the ward that night. Out of all the nights, out of all the hospitals, he was there the exact same moment her son was born, and he immediately took over the baby's care. The newborn was later transported to Monroe Carroll Jr. Children's Hospital at Vanderbilt NICU. For 2.5 months, he remained there, growing stronger. Doctors monitored him constantly, and yet something remarkable became very clear. Nothing was wrong. No catastrophic complications, no severe developmental issues, no major organ problems. He was just simply small. He just needed time to grow big enough to fit into an infant car seat is all. Today, that tiny premature baby is a teenager, healthy, alive, and thriving. And when his mother looks back on everything that happened, the timing, the peace she felt, the exact words repeating in her mind, that the specialist being there that one night, she believes it was far more than coincidence. Because sometimes miracles don't look like fire falling from heaven. Sometimes they look like a tiny baby boy fighting for breath and winning. And for her family, that night in Nashville wasn't just a medical survival story. It was a miracle.